It was just after midnight when the silence of the Burkina border was shattered. For hours, the bushland in the southeast had been still, the kind of silence that farmers know well, when even the crickets quiet down. Then a strange sound began to cut through the night, high-pitched, steady, mechanical. Those who heard it looked up and wondered what kind of machine could fly without roaring like a plane. A few seconds later, the answer came in fire. A single unmanned drone swept low over the horizon. Below it, a convoy of unmarked vehicles crept forward. No headlights, no signals, no plates. They were ghosts in the night, carrying men armed with advanced rifles, encrypted radios, and foreign night vision gear. They were trained professionals, but they never saw what was coming. The first missile hit the lead vehicle, turning it into a ball of flame. The second blast flipped another truck, sending its cargo scattering into the dirt. Within minutes, the sky lit up again, and again, until the road was nothing but wreckage. At first, no one knew who had struck. Was it an accident? A foreign intervention? A strike carried out by powers outside Burkina Faso? But as the smoke cleared, one fact became undeniable. The order had come from inside the country itself. President Ibrahim Traoré had authorized the strike. This was not just about stopping a convoy. It was about sending a message. The drone that carried out the mission was not American, not French, not controlled from abroad. It was the NA-7, a prototype built with technology from unlikely partners, enhanced by Russian systems, and encrypted with Burkina Faso's own codes. In 12 minutes, the balance of power shifted. For decades, Africa had been seen as a place dependent on others for defense. That night proved otherwise. A small nation had shown it could strike with precision, without asking permission, and without foreign control. And the question on everyone's mind was simple. What message was this sending to the West? And who were the men inside those burning trucks? The strike itself lasted only 12 minutes, but its impact would echo for years. The NA-7 drone, designed for speed and precision, was unlike anything the region had ever seen. Engineers in Ouagadougou had named it after a legendary Mossi warrior queen, a reminder that even in modern war, history and heritage still matter. Built in secret, tested quietly in northern Mali, and upgraded with Russian targeting software, the NA-7 was not just a machine. It was a statement of independence. That night, it carried 2 precision missiles and a custom warhead designed to destroy armored vehicles without harming civilians. As the drone closed in, intelligence officers in the capital followed every second. The convoy on the ground had tried to stay invisible, moving without headlights, weaving through dirt tracks to avoid checkpoints. Yet the satellite image intercepted 2 nights earlier had given everything away. The convoy was headed toward Koudougou, where a new oil refinery was under construction, a project meant to prove that Burkina Faso could build its economy without foreign control. For President Ibrahim Traoré, losing that refinery would mean losing far more than concrete and machinery. It would mean losing the trust of his people. When the missiles struck, the results were devastating. Flames leapt high into the night sky. The vehicles were reduced to twisted metal, their cargo scattered and burning. When Burkina forces arrived at the scene, the destruction was complete. But what they found among the wreckage told a darker story. These were not local rebels or desperate bandits. The bodies wore tactical gear rarely seen outside elite units. Their weapons were brand new, not scavenged. American-made rifles with biometric locks lay shattered in the dirt. French military radios still hummed on encrypted channels. Tactical maps printed in English were found among the debris, with Burkina resource sites highlighted in red. Investigators quickly realized this was not a random group. The fingerprints from surviving gear matched Nigerian nationals, many of them former Special Forces operatives. Some had only just left active duty, yet none carried identification, insignia, or official tags. They were soldiers stripped of flags, ghosts for hire. The discovery confirmed what many feared. This was not an accident, and it was not local. It was a professional mission, well-funded and carefully hidden. The money trail made it undeniable. Satellite tracking of financial transfers pointed to offshore accounts in the Caribbean, routed through shell companies in Abu Dhabi, London, and Paris. This was organized, deliberate, and expensive. Burkina analysts estimated the cost at tens of millions of dollars. No small group could afford this. Someone powerful wanted this mission carried out and wanted it hidden from the world. Then came the breakthrough. Intercepted communications revealed a code name repeated again and again. Falcon Hand. It was a name intelligence officers had seen before, tied to sabotage operations across the Sahel. It was a marker for jobs that needed to be erased from official records, operations where deniability was more important than success. This time, Falcon Hand had been caught red-handed. The most chilling discovery came when one of the dead operatives was found with a still-functioning phone. On it was a single contact labeled DC Handler. To many in the room, the meaning was clear. This was not just about mercenaries or rogue missions. It pointed to something larger, a network with links to foreign intelligence. The silence that followed was heavy. If true, it meant the refinery had not only been a local target, it had been marked by interests far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Back in the capital, President Traoré convened his closest advisors. He was not a man to act recklessly. Every strike, every order had to be justified. Yet this time, the evidence was overwhelming. Days earlier, his intelligence teams had intercepted an encrypted call that left no doubt. Operation Broken Spine begins in 72 hours. The message included coordinates and a timestamp for the refinery. For Traoré and his generals, the choice was clear. If they waited, they risked disaster. If they acted, they might stop it. And so, at 3:44 in the morning, the War Council gave the green light. The drone launched, the missile struck, and the convoy was erased. 12 minutes of fire changed everything. Burkina Faso was no longer defending itself quietly. It was sending a message in flames. But as the smoke cleared, one question refused to go away. Who truly signed off on Falcon Hand, and how far were they willing to go to break a nation determined to stand on its own? What investigators uncovered in the days following the strike pushed the story into a new phase. The charred vehicles and burned weapons were shocking enough, but the evidence that survived told an even more disturbing truth. The rifles with biometric locks were confirmed as recently manufactured in the United States. The radios traced back to French military suppliers, their serial numbers still active on encrypted systems. Tactical documents highlighted Burkina Faso's oil fields and mining sites. Every piece pointed to something more than mercenary work. The fingerprints taken from damaged equipment confirmed that many of the men were Nigerian nationals, trained in elite units only months earlier. Yet their names had been erased from official records. No military orders, no identification, nothing to connect them on paper. They had been wiped clean, turned into shadows for hire. For the Burkina intelligence community, the conclusion was unavoidable. This was not a rogue freelance job. It was a proxy mission designed to strike at the very heart of the nation's independence. The breakthrough came with the phone discovered among the wreckage. On it was a contact labeled simply DC Handler. That single line sent chills through the war room. Combined with offshore financial transfers through Abu Dhabi, London, and Paris, and the repeated use of the codename Falcon Hand, the pieces began to form a picture. This was not just sabotage. It was an organized attempt to cripple Burkina Faso's rise. The refinery at Koudougou, the symbol of economic sovereignty, had been targeted for destruction before it could even open its doors. When President Ibrahim Traoré convened the AES Council, the room was tense. Top officers from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger reviewed the intercepted calls and the satellite images. One phrase kept appearing in the reports: Operation Broken Spine. The implication was clear. If the convoy had reached the refinery, the nation would have lost not only a vital project, but the confidence of its people. Traoré listened in silence. Then he spoke 5 words that would soon become iconic. If they send ghosts, we send thunder. The drone strike was no longer just a tactical success. It had become a rallying cry. In Ouagadougou, thousands poured into the streets. Students painted murals of the NA-7 drone, with slogans like "Sovereignty or Nothing" splashed across city walls. Young women painted stripes on their cheeks and chanted, "Burkina is awake. Who's next?" Older men and women wept openly, saying they had lived long enough to see Africa finally stand on its own terms. The reaction spread far beyond Burkina Faso. In Mali and Niger, rallies erupted in solidarity. In Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa, student marches carried posters of the burning convoy with bold words, "Do not test our dignity." Even in Nigeria, where many of the mercenaries had been recruited, the silence of the government sparked outrage. Citizens felt betrayed, furious that their own elite soldiers had been turned into pawns for foreign agendas. Some mourned the loss of brothers and sons, while others demanded accountability from leaders in Abuja. Internationally, the response was divided. Washington released a cautious statement urging restraint and warning of rising instability in the Sahel. Paris condemned Burkina Faso's actions as dangerous, but offered no explanation for why French radios had been found on the battlefield. The European Union called for emergency talks, but the images of American rifles and Nigerian operatives circulating online undermined their position. For the people of Burkina Faso, the official statements from abroad only fueled their anger. Many asked the same question: if these governments were innocent, why did their equipment keep turning up in the hands of saboteurs? The silence from Abuja was even louder. No denial, no explanation, just a calculated stillness that convinced many Africans the truth was too dangerous to admit. In a live broadcast that evening, President Traoré faced the cameras. His tone was calm, but unyielding. "You armed the mercenaries. You trained the saboteurs. You lit the fuse. And now that we have struck back, you call us the threat." He paused, letting the silence hang over the room. Then he delivered the line that spread like wildfire across Africa. "Burkina Faso is not your puppet. Our borders are not your playground. If defending our land makes you uneasy, then our mission is working." The square erupted in celebration. Videos of his words flooded social media, remixed with music, painted on banners, and echoed in chants. For the first time in decades, the face of African resistance was not a foreign leader, but a young soldier from Burkina Faso. The climax had been reached. A drone strike that lasted 12 minutes had ignited a fire that no statement from Washington or Paris could put out. Yet behind the chance and the pride, a darker question lingered. If this was just one mission, how many more operations were waiting in the shadows? The drone strike may have lasted only minutes, but the consequences for Burkina Faso's society and politics were far-reaching. For ordinary citizens, the attack confirmed what many had long feared. Their nation was not only under pressure from within, but also from forces far beyond their borders. Families in Ouagadougou spoke in hushed tones about what would have happened if the convoy had reached the oil refinery. Parents imagined jobs lost, projects abandoned, and their children's futures stolen before they even began. Farmers in the countryside recalled the chaos of past conflicts and whispered prayers of relief that this time the threat had been stopped in time. The sense of relief quickly turned into anger. When investigators revealed that the mercenaries were linked to foreign suppliers and former Nigerian special forces, people felt betrayed. These were not nameless strangers from across the ocean. They were Africans, trained in elite programs, now being used to sabotage another African nation. In marketplaces and tea houses, citizens asked each other the same questions. Who paid them? Who ordered this? And why would neighbors stand by while Burkina Faso's sovereignty was attacked? Politically, the drone strike reshaped the landscape almost overnight. President Ibrahim Traoré, already seen as a bold leader, emerged as a figure of unshakable resolve. His decision to authorize the use of the NA-7 drone was interpreted not as a reckless gamble, but as an act of necessary courage. Ministers who had doubted him fell silent. Rivals within the political elite, many of whom had once considered him too young or too radical, now found themselves sidelined by the sheer force of his success. Traoré's words after the strike, "If they send ghosts, we send thunder," became more than rhetoric. They became a political doctrine. Yet the exposure of the plot also created dangerous ripples. The arrests of suspects tied to opposition figures, retired generals, and wealthy businessmen deepened distrust inside the political class. Some feared that the government would use the crisis to eliminate dissent. Others whispered about hidden sympathizers who had not yet been exposed. The line between patriotism and betrayal grew sharper, and many in positions of influence realized they could no longer remain neutral. They would either stand with the administration or risk being branded as complicit in foreign plots. On the streets, however, there was no such hesitation. The people rallied behind their president. Murals of Traoré appeared overnight, painted alongside the NA-7 drone. Crowds gathered in squares, waving AES flags and chanting slogans of unity. Religious leaders framed the strike as divine protection, a sign that the country's struggle for dignity was guided by a higher power. Elders reminded the youth of the sacrifices of Thomas Sankara and declared that Traoré was carrying the torch of unfinished battles. Still, beneath the pride lay anxiety. Citizens knew that retaliation was likely. Would foreign powers attempt economic punishment? Would there be new waves of covert operations? Would Burkina Faso be left isolated? These fears were not unfounded. Rumors of sanctions began to circulate in international media, and traders worried about the impact on basic goods. Mothers stocked extra rice and oil in case of shortages. Communities prepared for the possibility that the strike had only been the opening act in a much larger confrontation. The alliance with Mali and Niger provided reassurance. Operation Iron Shield gave people hope that they were no longer standing alone. The idea that an attack on one would now bring a response from all three nations spread quickly, turning fear into defiance. "We are not small anymore," a teacher in Ouagadougou told his students. "When they strike us, they strike three." The sense of collective defense lifted spirits across the country and reminded citizens that unity could be stronger than foreign interference. Internationally, Burkina Faso's stance inspired admiration in some quarters and unease in others. Across Africa, young people saw the strike as proof that their continent was no longer defenseless. In Western capitals, analysts debated whether Traoré's rise signaled a dangerous shift. But inside Burkina Faso, the meaning was clear. For the first time in generations, the people felt that their nation was not bowing, but standing tall. The political consequences, however, were far from settled. The exposure of foreign involvement and local collaborators had redrawn the battlefield. Trust was fragile, loyalties were being tested, and the country knew that enemies still lurked in the shadows. The question now was not whether Burkina Faso had won a battle. It was whether the strike had opened a new chapter in a much longer war. The fallout from the strike reached far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. In Washington, senior officials gathered for emergency briefings. The White House released a carefully worded statement urging restraint and warning against escalation in the Sahel. Yet behind the scenes, analysts admitted the truth. They had not expected Burkina Faso to field such advanced technology, nor had they anticipated that a small African nation would act with such precision and confidence. Some defense officials compared the strike to a Sputnik moment, a signal that the balance of power was shifting in unexpected ways. In Paris, the reaction was sharper. The French foreign minister condemned Burkina Faso's actions as reckless and destabilizing. But when asked why French radios had been found among the wreckage, the response was silence. European media replayed the footage of the burning convoy and Traoré's fiery speech, fueling debates about whether France and its allies had crossed a line that could no longer be hidden. The European Union called for emergency talks, but unity was fragile. Some member states argued for sanctions, while others warned that punishing Burkina Faso would only confirm accusations of neo-colonial interference. Elsewhere, the response was strikingly different. In Moscow, officials praised the Burkina government for defending its sovereignty and offered to deepen military cooperation. Beijing framed the event as evidence that Africa should be free to chart its own course, promising economic and technological support. Across the Middle East and Latin America, leaders sympathetic to anti-imperialist causes applauded Traoré as a new voice of resistance. For Americans watching from afar, the story carried uncomfortable echoes. Older generations remembered the Cold War, when the CIA had been linked to coups in Iran in 1953 and Chile in 1973. The pattern was familiar. A leader who defied outside control suddenly faced plots, sabotage, and shadow wars. Whether or not every accusation against Washington was true, the image of American rifles in the hands of mercenaries was powerful. It raised questions not only about U.S. policy in Africa, but also about the cost of intervention and the meaning of sovereignty. On the streets of Africa, however, the verdict was already clear. The strike was not seen as an act of recklessness. It was seen as a declaration that Africa was no longer willing to be managed from abroad. For the West, the message was unsettling. For Africans, it was electrifying. and the world was left to wonder whether this single drone strike had marked the beginning of a new era. By the end of that week, one fact was clear. Burkina Faso was no longer playing defense. The strike had changed everything. 50 foreign-trained operatives had been stopped before they could reach their target, but the evidence showed they were only one piece of a much larger plan. Documents recovered from encrypted servers revealed backup teams waiting for activation, new routes prepared, and funds still flowing through hidden accounts. The refinery at Koudougou had been saved, yet the threat was far from over. The danger now was not only in convoys moving under the cover of night, but in the unseen hands willing to burn a nation's future for profit and power. The warning signs spread quickly across the region. The Alliance of Sahel states issued a declaration. Any unregistered foreign military presence would be treated as hostile and eliminated. No negotiation, no compromise, only defense. For the first time in modern history, Africa's leaders spoke with one voice. This was not just about Burkina Faso, not just about the Sahel. It was about the right of every African nation to stand without interference. For the West, the drone strike was a shock. For Africa, it was a spark. Students in Ghana carried signs declaring "sovereignty or nothing." In Mali, murals of the NA-7 drone became symbols of pride. In Nigeria, citizens demanded answers from a government that had chosen silence over accountability. A single strike had exposed the fault lines of an entire continent. President Traoré ended his address with a vision larger than war. Standing on the refinery platform, surrounded by engineers and soldiers, he declared, "Fear is for those who borrow power. We built ours." His words echoed across Africa. They were not just a boast. They were a call to resist fear, to believe that dignity can still be defended in an age of shadows and sabotage. The question now belongs to us. Will the world respect Africa's new red line, or will it be crossed again? And if it is crossed, what will the response be? If this story made you pause and reflect on justice, dignity, and freedom, let your voice be heard. Share your thoughts, not as spectators, but as people who understand that history is written not only by leaders, but by ordinary citizens who refuse to stay silent. The fire has been lit. The question is whether we will let it burn out, or let it shine as a beacon of hope for generations to come.